Welcome to section 3. In this section, we're going to be discussing determine budget, another important process in the project cost management knowledge area. Alright, so without further ado, let's jump in. Now, looking at an overview of the determine budget process. The determine budget is a vital process in project cost management. It focuses on aggregating estimated costs to establish an authorized cost baseline. Okay, so this process has to do with aggregating the cost that you have estimated, all right, in order for us to have an established cost baseline. Now, what is the essence of the cost baseline? Now, having a baseline for our costs serves as the basis for project funding, expenditure tracking, and financial control throughout the life cycle of the project. All right, so when you have aggregated the estimated costs and you've established a cost baseline for your budget, you can now use this as a yardstick for your project funding. Right, it can also help you as a project manager to track your expenditure, all right, and even control your cash flow throughout the life cycle of the project. Now, by the end of this section, we should be able to understand the objectives of the determine budget process, identify the inputs, tools, and techniques, as well as the outputs of this process. So it will also help us to understand how budget determination contributes to the overall project success. All right, moving on. Now let's look at the objectives of the determine budget process. The primary objectives of determine budget include cost baseline. Like I mentioned before, the cost baseline helps us to be able to fund our projects, to track expenditure, and also to control our finances throughout the project. All right, so when we have a cost baseline developed and authorized for our projects, it will help to represent the total budget for that particular project. Fund allocation. Allocate the overall project budget to specific work packages, phases, or activity. All right, so the determine budget process helps us to allocate funds, all right, to work packages, to specific activities, phases, or milestones within the project. Also, financial control. This helps to establish a financial framework for monitoring and controlling project costs during the execution. Alright, so these are the primary objectives for the determine budget process. It helps us to establish an authorized cost baseline. It helps us in fund allocation, effective and efficient fund allocation. It also helps us in financial control. Now let's look at the inputs. What are the inputs for this process? Number one, cost estimates. Now, estimated costs from the estimate cost process form the foundation for developing the project budget. All right, so we already have our cost estimated from the previous process. Okay, so this now serves as a foundation for the project budget. Project schedule. Information on the planned timing and sequence of project activities. So if we're going to have proper budgeting, we have to have the timing for each activity in our project. All right, we have to know the flow, the sequence of each activity and when they should be taking place. All right, this will also help us in allocating funds as well. The resource calendars Details on the availability and utilization of resources over time. I've explained this before. A resource calendar has to do with the human resources, the people that will be carrying out various activities and what times they will be available during the life cycle of the project. Alright, so this will also help us to know who's doing what and how much we are spending for each of those activities. Risk register. Insights into potential risks and uncertainty that may impact project costs. Okay, so if we are going to be spending money on different activities, so we need to know what are those risks that can actually impinge upon those activities, all right, that may likely also adversely affect the costs. So that's the importance of this risk register as an input. So what are the tools and techniques we use for this process? First one is cost aggregation, summing up the estimated cost of individual work packages or activities to create an overall project budget. Okay, so you have to do a cost aggregation for the various work packages and activities in the project. Reserve analysis, determining contingency reserves for addressing identified risks and uncertainties. Right, so you have to determine what are the contingencies. All right, what are the contingencies for addressing the risks that have been identified. Funding limit reconciliation, aligning the project budget with funding constraints and organizational policies. Historical relationship, using historical relationships between project costs and other variables to refine budget estimates. Okay, so these are the tools and techniques that we use: cost aggregation, reserve analysis, funding limit reconciliation, and historical relationships. So what's the output of this process? The main output here is the project budget. All right, from this process you will get your budget for the project. This is the authorized time-phased financial plan for the project, indicating the total allocated cost over time. Right, so the project budget carries the total amount of funds that will be going into the project in every form of detail. All right, the cost for each activity, the flow of the activities, each phases and milestones, everything will be outlined in the project budget. Basis of estimates. Now this is the documentation detailing the assumptions, constraints, and methods used to create the budget. Project fund requirements, communicating the funding needs to support the project over its life cycle. All right, so this requirement is very critical, as it helps us to communicate funding needs, and this need helps to support your project. Okay, so moving on, let's see some of the key takeaways from the determined budget. Align with project objectives. The budget should align with the project's objectives and be realistic based on the estimated cost of various project elements. Incorporate contingencies. Contingency reserves should be included to address uncertainties and risks that may impact project costs. Iterative process. Determining the budget is an iterative process that may involve refining estimates as more detailed information becomes available. So it's an elaborative process, an iterative process that you keep refining and improving as you get more information. Now, the determined budget plays a vital role in effective cost management by establishing a financial plan that guides the project's financial activities and facilitates control over expenditures. Okay. It also involves a careful synthesis of cost estimates, project schedule, and risk considerations to create a realistic and achievable project budget. Alright, so this determined budget is very key as far as estimating your costs and budgeting your project is concerned. Alright, so I hope you got a grip on the determined budget process. And that brings us to the end of this section. I'll see you in the next section. Cheers.